I thought I knew what a tough job was, but nothing prepared me for the night shift at this desert roadhouse. Every creak, every shadow, and especially every customer added to a growing sense of unease. Stick around if you want to know what it's really like when your workplace has more secrets than it does patrons. The job posting appeared on my screen at 2 in the morning during one of those desperate, sleepless nights when unemployment feels like quicksand pulling you under. Night shift manager needed for Roadhouse establishment. Remote location. Competitive pay. Discretion required. The salary figure made my eyes widen. It was 3 times what I'd made at my last job, and all I had to do was manage a roadhouse in the Texas desert for 5 nights a week, midnight to 6 a.m. I should have questioned why anyone would pay that much for such a position. I should have wondered why they needed someone so desperately that they'd interview me over a crackling phone line within an hour of my application. But desperation has a way of drowning out common sense, and my bank account was screaming louder than my instincts. The man who interviewed me introduced himself only as Mr. Garrett. His voice was smooth, almost hypnotic, with the kind of West Texas drawl that could make a threat sound like a lullaby. He asked me 3 questions. Could I follow instructions exactly as given? Was I comfortable working alone? Did I have anyone who would worry if I didn't check in regularly? I answered yes, and no. He hired me on the spot and told me to arrive the following Tuesday at 11 p.m. for training. The Roadhouse, he said, was called The Last Stop, and I'd find it 40 miles west of Terlingua on a road that wasn't on most maps. Finding the place was an adventure in itself. My GPS lost signal 20 miles outside of Terlingua, and I had to rely on the hand-drawn map Mr. Garrett had emailed me. The highway narrowed to a 2-lane road, then to barely more than a dirt track cutting through an ocean of sand and scrub brush. The sun had set hours ago, and my headlights carved a pale tunnel through absolute darkness. No streetlights, no other cars, no signs of civilization except for the occasional fence post leaning at drunken angles. When the last stop finally materialized out of the darkness, my first thought was that I'd driven to the wrong place. The building looked ancient, a low-slung structure of weathered wood and rusted metal that seemed to grow out of the desert floor itself. A neon sign flickered weakly above the entrance, casting irregular pulses of red light across the empty parking lot. Open, it proclaimed, though nothing about the place looked welcoming. I parked my car next to the only other vehicle in the lot, a dust-covered pickup truck that might have been any color once, but was now uniformly beige. The silence when I cut my engine was profound, the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful but oppressive, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. The air smelled of creosote and something else, something faintly sweet and rotten that I couldn't identify. The inside of the Roadhouse was a museum of oddities. Mismatched furniture dotted the main room. Vinyl booths that looked salvaged from a 1950s diner, wooden tables scarred with decades of use, bar stools with ripped leather seats. The walls were covered in a chaotic collage of desert memorabilia. Rusted license plates from states I'd never heard of hung alongside faded photographs of stern-faced people in old-fashioned clothing. Mounted animal heads watched the room with glass eyes, but they weren't the usual deer or elk. I saw what looked like a jackalope, a creature I'd always assumed was purely mythological, and something with too many antlers that might have been a deer, but wasn't quite right in its proportions. The bar itself dominated one wall, a massive structure of dark wood polish to a dull sheen by countless elbows. Behind it, shelves held bottles of liquor in shapes I didn't recognize, their labels written in languages I couldn't read. A vintage cash register sat at one end, the kind with physical keys that rang when you pressed them. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, as if the place existed slightly out of time. Mr. Garrett emerged from a back room as I stood gawking at the decor. In person, he was tall and gaunt, with skin the color and texture of old leather. His eyes were a pale gray that seemed to catch and reflect the dim light like an animal's. He wore a BOLO tie with a turquoise clasp and a white shirt that might have been crisp once, but now looked tired. When he smiled, his teeth seemed too numerous. "Daniel," he said, extending a hand that felt dry and cool in mine. "Welcome to the last stop. Last chance for fuel, food, and fellowship before the deep desert." That's what the sign used to say, back when this place still got regular traffic. I asked him why it didn't anymore, why someone would operate a roadhouse in such an isolated location. He gave me a look that might have been amused or pitying. I couldn't tell. "The desert's a strange place," he said. "It works on different rules than the places you're used to. Some folks, they need a place like this, somewhere off the grid, somewhere that minds its own business." That should have been my first real warning, but I was too focused on the money, on the prospect of steady work. Mr. Garrett led me behind the bar and showed me the basics, where the clean glasses were kept, how to operate the antique cash register, which taps poured which beers. The kitchen was through a swinging door, just a simple setup with a grill, a deep fryer, and a refrigerator that hummed with an unsettling, irregular rhythm. "You won't get many customers," Mr. Garrett said as we returned to the main room. "Sometimes none at all. Sometimes a few. Never more than you can handle alone. Your job is simple. Serve them, take their money, and follow the rules." He produced a laminated sheet from behind the bar and laid it on the polished wood. "The rules of the last stop" was printed at the top in bold letters, followed by a numbered list. I leaned in to read them, and Mr. Garrett's hand clamped down on my wrist with surprising strength. "Not yet," he said softly. "First, you need to understand something. These rules aren't suggestions. They're not guidelines. They're the difference between finishing your shift and something else. Something worse. Every person who's worked here and followed the rules has walked out at dawn. Every person who's broken them hasn't. Do you understand?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. His intensity was unnerving, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of the isolation pressing down on me. Out here, there was no one to hear me scream, no one to call for help. My phone had no signal. I was completely alone with this strange man in this strange place. Mr. Garrett released my wrist and pushed the laminated sheet toward me. "Read them. Memorize them. Lie by them. Your first shift starts in 15 minutes. I'll be here tonight to observe, but after that, you're on your own. The night shift belongs to you, Daniel. Make sure it doesn't consume you." He walked back toward the rear of the roadhouse, his boots making no sound on the worn floorboards. I looked down at the rules, and a chill ran through me despite the desert heat that lingered in the building. There were 12 rules in total, typed in a plain, business-like font that made their bizarre content even more disturbing. As I read through them, my hands began to shake. This wasn't just a remote job with quirky policies. This was something else entirely, something that my rational mind wanted to reject but couldn't, because the deadly seriousness in Mr. Garrett's voice left no room for doubt. Whatever happened here after midnight, whatever walked through that door during the long hours before dawn, it followed rules that had nothing to do with the normal world. I looked up at the mounted heads on the wall, at the photographs of unsmiling faces, at the bottles behind the bar with their incomprehensible labels. The neon sign flickered outside, its red glow pulsing like a heartbeat. In the distance, I heard something that might have been wind or might have been something else, a sound like breathing carried across endless sand. My shift was about to begin, and I suddenly understood that the generous salary wasn't compensation for isolation or inconvenience. It was payment for survival. The question was whether I'd earn it, or become another mystery in this desert roadhouse where the rules were terrifying because they were necessary. The clock on the wall clicked over to midnight, and somewhere in the darkness outside, I heard the sound of an approaching engine. I read through the rules 3 times before midnight, trying to commit each one to memory, while simultaneously hoping they were some kind of elaborate joke. They weren't written with any humor or irony, just stark, Simple commands that assumed I'd understand their necessity without explanation. Rule 1. Never ask a customer their name, where they're from, or where they're going. Service with silence is service with safety. That one seemed odd, but manageable, like a privacy policy taken to an extreme. Maybe Mr. Garrett catered to people running from something, folks who needed anonymity more than conversation. Rule 2. The Roadhouse closes at 6 a.m. sharp. Any customer still present at 5:55 a.m. must be informed they have 5 minutes to leave. Do not allow anyone to remain past closing. No exceptions. There was an underlined addendum. If a customer refuses to leave, go to the back room and lock yourself in until 7 a.m. Do not come out before then. Rule 3. If a customer orders something not on the menu, apologize and offer them what is available. Never, under any circumstances, attempt to accommodate special requests. The menu was taped to the bar, a simple affair listing basic bar food and standard drinks. Nothing exotic, nothing that would require special preparation. Rule 4. Do not enter the storage room behind the kitchen. You have everything you need in the main prep area. If you run out of something, you run out. The storage room door will be locked, and you don't have the key. This is for your protection. I glanced at the storage room door while Mr. Garrett was showing me the kitchen. It was heavy wood reinforced with metal bands. And yes, there was a serious padlock securing it. Rule 5. If you hear sounds from the storage room, ignore them. They're not your concern. This rule made my stomach clench. What could possibly be in there that would make noise? And why would I need to ignore it? Rule 6. Between 2 and 3 a.m., you may experience extreme drowsiness. Do not fall asleep. Walk around. Play music. Do whatever you need to stay awake. If you sleep during the dead hour, you may not wake up. The phrase dead hour was somehow worse than any explicit threat. Rule 7. Some customers will not speak. Some will not eat or drink what they order. Some will sit for hours without moving. This is normal. Treat them as you would any other patron. I wondered what definition of normal applied to a place like this. Rule 8. If a customer's reflection doesn't match their appearance, do not react. Serve them as usual and avoid looking at mirrors or reflective surfaces until they leave. My hands had started shaking when I read this one. It was the first rule that explicitly acknowledged something impossible. Rule 9. The jukebox will sometimes play on its own. Let it. Do not unplug it. Do not try to stop it. The music it plays is not for you. I noticed the vintage jukebox in the corner. Its chrome dulled with age. It wasn't plugged into anything I could see. Rule 10. If someone knocks on the door after you've closed, do not answer. The Roadhouse is open from midnight to 6 a.m. Anyone arriving outside these hours should not be acknowledged. I thought about the absolute isolation, the miles of empty desert in every direction. Who would be knocking? Rule 11. Clean up any blood immediately. Use the special cleaning solution under the sink, not water. Dispose of rags in the metal bin outside, never in the regular trash. The casual mention of blood, as if it was inevitable, made my throat tight. Rule 12. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Maintain distance. Stay behind the bar when possible. Remember, you're here to serve, not to engage. This was somehow the most frightening rule because it admitted that even following all the others might not be enough. Mr. Garrett reappeared as I finished reading. He'd changed into different clothes, now wearing what looked like traveling gear, a canvas jacket and heavy boots. Questions, he asked. All of them, I wanted to say, but Rule 1 seemed to extend beyond customers to the job itself. Don't ask. Don't dig. Just survive. Instead, I asked, what if I break a rule by accident? Then you'd better hope it's a minor one, he replied, and that you can correct it quickly. The desert's patient, Daniel, but it's not forgiving. The things that come here, they follow the rules because it's safe for them. You follow the rules because it's safe for you. It's a balance. Don't tip it. The sound of the approaching engine grew louder, and headlights swept across the parking lot. An old sedan, probably from the 1970s, rolled to a stop near my car. Mr. Garrett moved to a booth in the far corner, becoming an observer. "Your shift, your rules," he said quietly. "I'm just a customer now." The door opened, and my first patron entered. She was a woman who might have been 30 or who might have been 60, with long dark hair and wearing a dress that looked vintage, like something from the 1940s. Her shoes made no sound on the floor. She sat at the bar, 3 stools from where I stood, and placed her hands flat on the wood. Her nails were painted a dark red that looked black in the dim light. I waited for her to order, remembering Rule 1. Don't ask. Let them speak first. She stared at me for a long moment, and I noticed her eyes were entirely black. No whites, no irises, just solid darkness that reflected the light behind the bar. My heart hammered, but I kept my face neutral. Rule 7. Some customers won't be normal. Treat them like anyone else. "Whiskey," she said finally. Her voice sounded like wind through a canyon, hollow and distant. "Neat." I poured her a standard whiskey from one of the bottles I recognized and set it in front of her. She didn't touch it immediately, just looked at the glass as if seeing through it to something beyond. I retreated to the far end of the bar, giving her space as Rule 12 advised. The jukebox suddenly crackled to life, playing a song I didn't recognize. The melody was strange, not quite following any musical structure I knew, and the lyrics were in a language that sounded ancient. Rule 9. Let play. It's not for you. The woman at the bar tilted her head, listening, and something like a smile crossed her face. Over the next hour, 3 more customers arrived. An old man in a rancher's outfit who smelled of dust and decay. A young couple who never looked at each other and ordered separate drinks that they didn't touch. A man in a business suit that looked like it hadn't been in fashion since the 1980s, complete with wide lapels and a garish tie. None of them spoke beyond ordering. None of them seemed quite right. I noticed it in small ways. The rancher cast no shadow despite the overhead lights. The young woman's hair moved as if in a breeze, though the air in the Roadhouse was still and heavy. The businessman's reflection in the bar's polished surface showed him in different clothes, a simple shirt and pants, and his face was different too, younger and marked with what looked like old scars. Rule 8. Don't react to mismatched reflections. At 1:47 a.m., I heard it for the first time, a sound from a storage room behind the kitchen. It started as a low scraping, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. Then came a series of thumps, rhythmic and deliberate. My instinct was to investigate, to make sure nothing was wrong, but Rule 5 was clear. Not my concern. Ignore it. The scraping continued for 10 minutes, accompanied by what might have been voices, though I couldn't make out words. The sounds were wrong somehow, too low or too high, oscillating in a way that made my teeth ache. I turned on the small radio behind the bar, finding the stationary playing old country music, anything to mask the noises from the storage room. At 2:15 a.m., the drowsiness hit me like a physical force. Rule 6 had warned me about the dead hour between 2 and 3, but I hadn't expected it to be this overwhelming. My eyelids felt weighted with lead. My body screamed for sleep. The bar stool behind me looked impossibly comfortable, and the idea of just resting my head for a moment became the most tempting thing in the world. I forced myself to move, walking the length of the bar, then into the kitchen and back. I splashed cold water on my face. I did jumping jacks behind the bar, not caring how ridiculous I looked. The customers didn't react to my frantic activity. They sat in their various positions, some drinking, some not, all of them eerily still in a way that living people shouldn't be. The businessman caught my eye during one of my laps around the bar. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't read, something between curiosity and hunger. When I met his gaze, he spoke for the first time since ordering his drink. It's hard, isn't it, the staying awake. Some don't make it through their first dead hour. I shouldn't have engaged. Rule 12 said maintain distance. But fatigue was making me stupid, and I asked, "What happens if someone falls asleep?" His smile was all wrong. Too wide, showing too many teeth. They become part of the place, part of the desert. There's a reason the rules exist, friend. This roadhouse sits on old ground, and old ground has old claims. Sleep here during the dead hour, and you might not wake up as yourself. Might not wake up at all. I wanted to ask more, but Mr. Garrett's cough from his corner booth cut through my curiosity. Right. Don't ask. Don't engage beyond basic service. I retreated behind the bar and focused on staying awake, counting the tiles on the floor, reciting song lyrics in my head, anything to make it through the next 30 minutes. At exactly 3 a.m., the drowsiness lifted as suddenly as it had descended. My head cleared, my energy returned, and I felt almost normal again. The businessman finished his untouched drink in one gulp, stood, and left a $20 bill on the bar. He walked out without another word, his shadow finally appearing as he moved, though it seemed to lag behind him by a second or two. The rest of his shift passed in a blur of strange customers and stranger occurrences. A family arrived at 4 a.m., 2 parents and 3 children, all dressed in clothes from different eras. The children never blinked. A motorcycle gang showed up at 4:30, 6 riders in leather who left their bikes running outside, the engine somehow silent despite being visible through the window. A woman came in at 5:15 and ordered coffee, her hands covered in what looked like burn scars that moved and shifted when I wasn't looking directly at them. At 5:55 a.m., I remembered Rule 2. I announced to the remaining 4 customers that the Roadhouse would close in 5 minutes. 3 of them stood immediately and left without payment, which seemed to be acceptable based on Mr. Garrett's lack of reaction. The 4th, an elderly woman who had been sitting in a booth since 3 a.m., didn't move. I approached her carefully. "Ma'am, we're closing. You'll need to leave." She looked up at me with eyes that were filmed over white, clearly blind, but somehow still seeing. "Just 5 more minutes," she whispered. "I'm so tired. Just let me rest 5 more minutes." Every human instinct told me to show compassion, to let this old woman rest. But Rule 2 was absolute. "I'm sorry, but you need to leave now. We're closed." Her face changed, the wrinkles deepening, her mouth opening wider than it should. "You're making a mistake," she said in a voice that was no longer elderly or frail. 5 minutes. That's all I need. 5 minutes of your time." I backed away toward the bar, where Mr. Garrett was now standing. He gave me a subtle nod. I'd done the right thing. The woman stood slowly, her body unfolding in sections, becoming taller than she'd been, her shape not quite human anymore. She walked to the door, and with each step, she returned to her original appearance. At the threshold, she turned back. "I'll remember you," she said, "the next time I'm passing through." The door closed behind her, and I heard her car start. At exactly 6 a.m., the first light of dawn crept through the windows, and Mr. Garrett clapped me on the shoulder. "You did well," he said. "Most people break at least 2 rules on their first night. You stuck to them." "What was she?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "She's gone. You're still here. That's what matters. The rules kept you safe, Daniel. Remember that for tomorrow night." He left me with instructions to clean up and lock the door behind me, reminding me to return at 11 p.m. the following night. As I wiped down the bar and swept the floor, I found things that shouldn't exist. Coins from countries that weren't on any map, a photograph that showed the last stop in crystal clarity but was dated 1873, a tooth that was too large to be human and too strange to be animal. I locked up at 6:30 and walked to my car. In daylight, the last stop looked even more decrepit, a relic that should have collapsed decades ago. But it stood, stubborn and wrong, waiting for darkness to bring it back to life. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror and could have sworn I saw figures in the windows, watching me leave. I had 4 more nights of my work week. For more nights of following rules I didn't understand to survive things I couldn't explain. The money was good, but I was starting to understand it wasn't compensation. It was hazard pay for dancing on the edge of something vast and hungry that made its home in the deep desert, and the last stop was its watering hole. The second night, I arrived 30 minutes early, hoping daylight would make the last stop seem less ominous. It didn't. If anything, the failing dusk made the Roadhouse look like a wound in the desert, a dark blot that absorbed light rather than reflected it. I sat in my car until 11:15, watching the sun sink below the horizon and trying to convince myself that last night had been exhaustion and imagination. Then I remembered the tooth I'd found, now sitting in a Ziploc bag in my glove compartment. I'd examined it in my apartment's harsh fluorescent lighting, and it hadn't become less impossible. Whatever creature it came from had existed, and it had been inside the Roadhouse. The rules were real because what they protected against was real. Mr. Garrett's truck wasn't in the parking lot, which meant I was truly alone for my second shift. I unlocked the front door, and the smell hit me immediately. That same sweet rut I'd noticed the first night, but stronger now, more insistent. I checked the kitchen, the bathrooms, the main room. Nothing obvious, but the scent seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, as if it seeped from the walls themselves. I set up for the shift, following the same routine Mr. Garrett had shown me. Check the taps, count the register, make sure the kitchen was stocked. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for one detail. There was a new addition to the wall of photographs. It showed a young man in modern clothes, standing behind the bar with a forced smile. The photo was dated 3 weeks ago, but I'd never seen this person. I looked closer and noticed his eyes had been scratched out, deliberate gouges through the glossy paper. Midnight arrived, and with it, the customers. The first was a trucker, or at least something wearing a trucker's form. He was massive, filling the doorway, wearing a grease-stained cap and clothes that smelled of diesel and something else, something organic and rotten. When he sat at the bar, the stool creaked alarmingly. "Coffee," he rumbled. "Black. Keep it coming." I poured from the commercial coffee maker, noting that my hand shook slightly as I set the cup before him. He wrapped his hands around it, and I saw his fingers were wrong. Too many knuckles. Nails that were more like claws, filed down to almost pass as human. He caught me looking and smiled. "Long haul," he said. "Changes a man." Over the next hour, I developed a rhythm. Serve, retreat, observe. Don't engage beyond necessity. The trucker was joined by others. A woman in a sundress who ordered wine and cried silently into her glass, tears that evaporated before they could fall. A teenager in clothes from the 1960s who played the same song on the jukebox 7 times, swaying to music I couldn't hear through my own ears but felt in my bones. A group of 3 men in identical suits who sat at separate tables and never looked at each other, despite clearly being together in some way. At 1:30 a.m., a regular walked in. I knew she was a regular because of how the other customers reacted. Everyone stopped what they were doing. The trucker paused mid-sip. The crying woman's tears froze. The teenager stopped swaying and watched her cross the room. She was stunning in a way that hurt to look at, with features too perfect, too symmetrical, like a sculpture of beauty rather than a real thing. She wore a red dress that seemed to move independent of her body, fabric flowing like liquid. She sat at the bar directly in front of me. "Daniel," she said, and hearing my name in her voice was like hearing a song I'd forgotten I knew. "You're new." I didn't ask how she knew my name. I didn't ask anything. Rule 1 extended to everyone, regulars included. I waited for her to order. "You're learning," she said with approval. "That's good. So many don't. They ask questions, and questions open doors that should stay closed." "I'll have a martini. Dry. 3 olives." I made the drink exactly as requested, aware that every customer in the Roadhouse was still watching. When I set it before her, she ran one finger around the rim of the glass, and frost formed where she touched. "Do you know what this place is, Daniel?" I didn't answer, focusing on wiping down the already clean bar. She laughed, a sound like crystal bells. Smart boy. This place, it's a way station, a stopping point between one place and another. Most of the customers, they're passing through from somewhere to somewhere else. Places that don't have names and languages you speak. They need rest, refreshment, a moment of normalcy before continuing their journeys. I kept wiping the bar, but I was listening. She wasn't asking questions, so perhaps responding wasn't breaking the rules. And some, she continued, are like me. We live in the in-between spaces. We exist in the margins. This roadhouse sits on a crossroads. Daniel, though you need different eyes to see it. Roads that run through other planes, other dimensions, other states of being. We all converge here at the last stop because it's neutral ground, safe ground, as long as the rules are followed. She sipped her martini, and the liquid in the glass never decreased. Mr. Garrett is careful about who he hires. You're what, the fifth this year? The others didn't make it. Couldn't follow simple instructions. Couldn't resist the urge to investigate, to question, to know. Curiosity killed them, though not always literally. Some are still alive, technically. They just exist elsewhere now. A chill ran through me. The photo on the wall with the scratched-out eyes. One of the former employees? Your predecessor, she said, following my glance, lasted 2 weeks. Broke Rule 4. Went into the storage room despite being warned. What he found there claimed him. Parts of him, anyway. The rest wanders the desert, looking for completion. You might see him one night, pressing against the windows. Don't let him in. He's not entirely human anymore. At 2:05 a.m., the dead hour's drowsiness crashed over me like a wave. But tonight it was worse, accompanied by hallucinations. I saw things in my peripheral vision, shadows that moved with purpose, shapes forming in the corners that dissolved when I looked directly at them. The trucker's face began to melt, revealing something angular and sharp beneath. The crying woman's tears turned to blood, pooling on her table. The 3 men in suits stood in unison and began walking toward the bar, their movements perfectly synchronized, like puppets on the same strings. I forced myself to move, slapping my face hard enough to sting. The pain helped, grounding me in reality. I did push-ups behind the bar, then grabbed a bottle and started reorganizing the back shelf. Anything to keep my body active. The beautiful woman in red watched me with amusement, still sipping her endless martini. It's stronger tonight, she observed. The dead hour. The desert's hungry. There's something coming, Daniel. Something that's been traveling a long time to reach this crossroads. It'll arrive soon. Maybe tomorrow night. Maybe the next. When it does, you'll want to remember every rule, especially the ones about staying behind the bar and maintaining distance. At 2:58, the hallucinations stopped abruptly. The trucker's face was just a face again, weathered and tired. The woman's tears were just tears. The 3 men sat at their separate tables, no longer moving. I felt like I'd survived a fever dream, shaky but clear-headed. The beautiful woman finished her drink and stood. She left a gold coin on the bar, stamped with symbols I didn't recognize. For your service, she said, and for surviving. You're stronger than the others, Daniel. That's good. You'll need that strength very soon. She walked out, and as the door closed behind her, the other customers resumed their previous behaviors, like someone had pressed play on a paused scene. The dead hour had passed, and I had made it through again. The rest of the shift was relatively quiet. A few more customers drifted in and out, each one strange in their own way, but none as unsettling as the woman in red. At 4:30 a.m., I heard the scratching from a storage room again, but tonight it was accompanied by something else. A voice muffled through the heavy door, calling what might have been my name or might have been something that just sounded similar. I turned the radio up louder and focused on washing glasses that were already clean. Rule 5. Not my concern. Whatever was in there, it wasn't my problem as long as I didn't make it my problem. But I couldn't help wondering what my predecessor had seen when he opened that door. would have been terrible enough to claim parts of him and leave the rest wandering incomplete. At 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the warning call for closing, the front door opened and a man stumbled in. He was covered in dust, his clothes torn, his face sunburned and bleeding from dozens of small cuts. He made it 2 steps inside before collapsing. Every instinct I had screamed to help him, to call for medical assistance. But my phone had no signal out here, and the nearest hospital was probably 2 hours away. I started to move around the bar toward him, but the trucker, who'd been nursing his coffee for the entire shift, stood and blocked my path. "Don't," he said quietly. "Look at him. Really look." I did, and felt my stomach turn. The man on the floor wasn't casting a shadow despite the overhead lights. His chest wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. And his eyes, when they opened and fixed on me, were completely white, clouded over like the old woman from the previous night who'd wanted just 5 more minutes. "Please," the man on the floor whispered. "Water. Help me. I've been walking so long. Just let me rest here. Just until sunrise." It was 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes, until the Roadhouse officially closed. Rule 2 said any customers still present at 5:55 had to be warned. But this person wasn't a customer. He'd come in but hadn't ordered, hadn't sat down, hadn't followed the normal patterns. He just collapsed, and now he was begging for sanctuary. "Daniel," he said, and I realized I'd never told him my name. "Daniel, please. Don't make me go back out there. The desert's so hungry. I've been running for so long. Just let me stay. Just until dawn." The trucker remained between us, a wall of flesh that smelled of diesel and decay. "He's not what he appears," he said. "The desert doesn't let go of what it claims. He's bait, boy. A lure. You help him, you break the rules, and then others can come in. Things that don't follow any rules at all." At 5:55, I made my announcement. "The Roadhouse is closing in 5 minutes. All patrons must leave." I looked at the man on the floor. "That includes you. You need to go." His face twisted with rage and desperation. His face twisted with rage and desperation. "You're condemning me," he hissed, and his voice changed, becoming layered with multiple tones, some human, some definitely not. "You're sending me back to the sand, to the emptiness, to the endless walking. Rules are rules," the trucker said, still blocking my path. "Best leave now while you can still choose to." The man on the floor began to change. His skin took on a grayish tint, cracking like dried earth. Sand poured from the tears in his clothes, more than should have been possible. He stood, his movements jerky and wrong, joints bending at angles that defied anatomy. "Remember this mercy," he said, his white eyes fixed on me. "Remember it when I come back. And I will come back, Daniel. They always do." He walked out, each footstep leaving a pile of sand that evaporated into nothing moments later. Through the window, I watched him disappear into the pre-dawn darkness, his form dissolving like morning mist until there was nothing left but empty desert. At exactly 6 a.m., the trucker drained the last of his cold coffee and stood. "You did good tonight, kid. Better than good. Most would have helped that poor bastard, and then we'd all be in trouble. The rules protect everyone here, not just you. Remember that." He left a $50 bill on the bar and walked out to his rig, which I noticed for the first time had no license plate and no company logo, just blank metal where identifiers should be. I cleaned up mechanically, my mind replaying the night's events. As I swept behind a bar, I found another tooth, larger than the first, and what looked like a piece of crystallized something. It was translucent and sharp, humming faintly in my hand before I dropped it into a bag with the other strange artifacts I'd been collecting. The drive home was surreal. Dawn painted the desert in shades of orange and pink, beautiful and serene, giving no hint of the things that moved through it in darkness. I passed a stranded car on the roadside, hood up, no one around, and I didn't stop. Couldn't stop, because I kept thinking about the man who'd stumbled into the Roadhouse, claiming he'd been walking, running, trying to escape the desert's hunger. How long had he been out there? And what had claimed him in the first place? Back in my apartment, I couldn't sleep. I kept researching on my laptop, looking up the last stop, searching for information about disappearances in that part of Texas, trying to find anything that would explain what I was experiencing. The Roadhouse appeared on no maps. The few mentions I found online were vague, almost deliberately obscure, references in weird forums and paranormal blogs that most people would dismiss as creative fiction. One post caught my attention, dated from 4 months ago. If you're reading this, I made it out. 3 months working the night shift at a place that shouldn't exist. The money's real, but the cost is higher than you think. Every night takes something from you. Every rule you follow cars away a piece of your old life, your old understanding. By the time I quit, I couldn't look at normal people the same way. Couldn't pretend the world was what I'd always thought it was. To whoever takes this job next, the rules will keep your body safe, but they can't protect your mind. Good luck. You'll need it. The post was signed JR, and the accompanying photo showed the last stop in the same state I saw it every night. In the reflection of the Roadhouse window, barely visible, was a figure that looked like the photo on the wall, the one with the scratched-out eyes. I tried to sleep, but managed only a few hours of fitful rest, plagued by dreams of sand pouring through my fingers, of voices calling from locked rooms, of beautiful women in red dresses who smiled with too many teeth. When I woke at 4 p.m., I found sand in my bed, though I'd showered thoroughly before lying down. Just a small pile, right next to my pillow, as if something had been lying there beside me. The third night arrived too quickly. I drove to the last stop with a sense of dread that had become familiar. The Roadhouse looked the same as always, a constant in a world that was becoming increasingly fluid and uncertain. I noticed something new in the parking lot. Tire tracks that led to the building, but didn't lead away, as if vehicles had arrived and then simply vanished. Inside, the smell of sweet was stronger than ever. I checked the usual spots, and this time I found the source. The mounted animal heads on the walls were decaying. The jackalope's furs falling out in patches, revealing desiccated skin beneath. The impossible deer thing dripped something dark and viscous from its too many antlers. The glass eyes of all the creatures had developed a film, making them look blind, like the man from the previous night. At midnight, the door opened, and a family entered. Mother, father, 2 children, a boy and a girl who looked about 8 and 10. They were dressed normally, like any American family on a road trip, and for a moment, I felt relief. Finally, actual human customers, people who weren't wrong in some fundamental way. Then I noticed the details. Their clothes, while normal in style, were all in shades of gray. Not faded, but actually grayscale, as if color couldn't quite stick to them. They moved in perfect unison, their steps synchronized, sitting in a booth with movements that mirrored each other exactly. When the father spoke, all 4 of them opened their mouths, but only his voice emerged. 4 waters, for burgers, fries. The children stared at me with expressions that were too blank, too empty. No fidgeting, no sibling dynamics, no life behind their eyes. I prepared their order, noting that my hands were steadier now than on previous nights. I was adapting, accepting the impossible as simply the nature of this job. That realization should have frightened me more than it did. How quickly humans can normalize the abnormal when survival depends on it. The night progressed with a parade of regulars and newcomers. A priest in stained vestments who ordered holy water and wasn't joking. A woman who appeared to be on fire but wasn't burning, flames licking harmlessly across her skin as she drank ice water and left scorch marks on the bar. A child who couldn't have been more than 5, sitting alone in a booth, playing with something that might have been a toy or might have been alive. I couldn't quite tell. At 2:11 a.m., during the dead hour, I heard it clearly for the first time. Someone calling my full name from the storage room. Not just Daniel, but Daniel James Morrison, my complete legal name that I'd never given anyone here. The voice was familiar, like someone I should recognize, but couldn't quite place. Daniel James Morrison, I know you're out there. I know you can hear me. It's so dark in here. So cold. Please, just open the door. Just for a moment. I need to see light again. I need to see a face that isn't. The voice cut off abruptly, replaced by screaming. Not human screaming, but something that approximated it, like an animal trying to mimic human distress. I cranked the radio to maximum volume, but I could still hear it underneath, that terrible not quite human sound. The beautiful woman in red appeared at 2:30, materializing in a booth without having entered through the door. "It's calling you specifically now," she said, gliding to the bar. "That means it's learned your name. That means it's getting stronger. The thing in the storage room, it feeds on attention, on acknowledgement. Every time you hear it and wonder what it is, you give it power. Stop wondering, Daniel. Stop listening. Let it scream into the void." "What is it?" I asked, breaking my usual silence. The dead hour made me reckless, the exhaustion eating at my judgment. She studied me for a long moment. "Honestly, I don't know. I don't think anyone does. Not even Mr. Garrett. It was here before the Roadhouse, before this land was called Texas, before humans walked this desert. The Roadhouse was built around it, over it, containing it. The storage room is a cage, not a pantry. And what's in the cage wants out very, very badly." She ordered her usual martini, and, as I made it, she continued, "Tomorrow night is the 4th night. 4 is a significant number in the deep mathematics of this place. Things that have been traveling will arrive. The convergence I mentioned is coming. You'll see customers tomorrow that even the regulars fear. Stay behind the bar, Daniel. No matter what happens, no matter what you see, stay behind the bar." At 4 a.m., all the customers left simultaneously, as if responding to a signal I couldn't perceive. Within 30 seconds, the Roadhouse was empty except for me. The silence was profound and wrong. I'd never experienced the place completely vacant during operating hours. Even the jukebox was quiet, its lights dark. Then I heard footsteps on the roof. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Something walking across the flat surface above me, back and forth, like a guard on patrol. The ceiling creaked under the weight. Dust drifted down from the old boards. Whatever was up there was massive. I stayed behind the bar, gripping the edge so hard my knuckles went white. The footsteps continued for 20 minutes, and in that time, I aged years. The isolation, the wrongness, the sheer impossibility of everything pressing down on me. I understood then what the online post had meant. The rules would keep my body safe, but my mind was being fundamentally altered by this place. I was seeing too much, knowing too much. The normal world would never feel real again. At 4:20, the footsteps stopped. I heard something like wings, massive wings, beating the air. Then silence. A car pulled into the lot moments later, and an elderly couple entered, ordering coffee and pie as if nothing unusual had just occurred. Maybe for them, it hadn't been unusual. Maybe this was just another night at the last stop. At 5:55, I gave the closing warning. Everyone left peacefully. At 6 a.m., dawn light crept through the windows, and I exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding for hours. Another night survived. Another night closer to what? Understanding. Madness. Some transformation I couldn't yet perceive. As I cleaned, I found a feather near the front door. It was as long as my forearm, black with an iridescent sheen that hurt to look at directly. The quill was sharp enough to draw blood when I tested it with my thumb. I added it to my collection of impossible things. The drive home was foggy, thick mist rolling across the desert despite the clear morning sky elsewhere. My car pushed through clouds of white that seemed to cling to the vehicle, reluctant to release me. In the mist, I saw shapes, tall, angular things that might have been cacti, or might have been standing figures watching my passage. At home, I couldn't even pretend to try sleeping. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the collection of artifacts from the Roadhouse. A tooth, a crystallized shard, a feather, a gold coin. Physical proof that what I was experiencing was real. But proof for whom? Who would believe me? Who could I tell? I thought about quitting. I could just not show up tonight. Let Mr. Garrett find another desperate fool to work the night shift. But even as I thought it, I knew I wouldn't. Part of it was the money. I'd never make this much anywhere else. Part of it was morbid curiosity. I wanted to understand what the Roadhouse was, what it served. But mostly it was something else. A sense that I was now part of something. That the Roadhouse had marked me in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. Walking away wouldn't erase what I'd seen. It wouldn't make me unknow what I now knew about the world's hidden layers. I was invested now, for better or worse. And tomorrow was the fourth night. The night the woman in red had warned me about. The night when things even the regulars feared would arrive at the last stop. I spent the day preparing mentally, reviewing each rule, committing them to memory, so completely they become instinct. Whatever was coming, I'd face it the way I'd faced everything else, with silence, obedience to the rules, and a desperate hope that following instructions would be enough to see sunrise one more time. The fourth night waited for me, patient and inevitable as the desert itself. The sun was setting as I drove toward the last stop on the fourth night, and I noticed something I'd missed before. The desert itself looked different as I approached the Roadhouse. The landscape became increasingly strange, almost alien. Rock formations that seemed to shift position when I wasn't looking directly at them. Plants that grew at impossible angles, defying gravity. The sky took on a purple tint near the horizon that had nothing to do with the sunset. I was crossing a threshold, I realized. The Roadhouse wasn't just remote. It existed in a liminal space, a place where the normal rules of reality wore thin. Every night I drove here, I was passing from one world into another, and the journey was becoming easier, the boundary more permeable. That should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange sense of homecoming. Mr. Garrett's truck was in a parking lot for the first time since my first shift. He was waiting inside, sitting at the bar with a cup of coffee, looking older and more tired than I remembered. When I entered, he studied me with those pale gray eyes that caught the light like an animal's. "Fourth night," he said. "You've done well, Daniel. Better than I expected. Honestly, most don't make it this far." He gestured to the walls, and I noticed there were more photographs now, dozens of them, all showing different people behind the bar over what must have been decades, all with their eyes scratched out. Everyone who couldn't follow the rules. Everyone who let curiosity or compassion override common sense. This place keeps a record. "What happens tonight?" I asked, too tired to maintain my usual silence. Mr. Garrett smiled without humor. "Tonight, you'll understand what the last stop really is. Tonight, the major players arrive, the things that use this crossroads for significant transitions. You've been seeing the regulars, the small travelers, the lost things. Tonight, you'll see the powers." He said it with a capital P, and somehow I could hear the emphasis. "The rules will keep you safe if you follow them perfectly. No deviations, no matter what happens. No matter who walks through that door or what they look like. You stay behind the bar, you serve with silence, and you don't engage. Can you do that?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Good. Because the thing is, Daniel, this isn't just a test for you anymore. Tonight, this place serves its real purpose. The last stop is a meeting point, a neutral ground where entities negotiate, trade, and sometimes settle disputes. Wars can be prevented here. Catastrophes can be averted, or caused. And all of it happens over drinks and burgers, served by whoever's desperate or foolish enough to work the night shift." He stood, finishing his coffee. "I'll be here, watching, but I can't interfere. Once the powers arrive, we're all bound by ancient protocols. You're the bartender, the neutral party. They'll test you, Daniel. They'll try to make you choose sides, break rules, show favor. Don't. Your only allegiance is to the Roadhouse itself and the rules that govern it. Mr. Garrett moved to his usual corner booth just as midnight arrived. The door opened immediately, as if something had been waiting for the exact moment. The first power entered, and I understood instantly why the woman in red had warned me. It wore a human shape the way I might wear a coat, something assumed for convenience but not truly fitted. It was tall, impossibly tall, having a bend to fit through the doorframe, even though the doorframe seemed to expand to accommodate it. Its face was beautiful and terrible, features too perfect, constantly shifting between male and female, young and old, every race and none. Whiskey, it said, and its voice was like thunder rolling across distant mountains. Your best. I poured Jameson with shaking hands, setting it on the bar. The power didn't sit, just stood there, towering over everything. Where its shadow fell, the air grew cold, frost forming on the wooden surfaces. The second power arrived moments later, flowing through the door like smoke given form. It was darkness visible, a roughly humanoid shape that absorbed light. When it moved, I heard the sound of wind through empty places, the whisper of forgotten names, the echo of last breaths. Red wine, it said in a voice like rustling leaves and distant screams. The oldest you have. I found a bottle covered in dust, no label, and poured. The wine looked black in the glass, thick as blood. The darkness thing took the glass, and the wine evaporated into shadow, feeding it somehow. They were joined by a third, and this one made me take a step back despite myself. It was fire and angles, geometry that hurt to perceive, a creature of pure mathematics given physical form. Looking at it directly made my eyes water and my brain ache, as if human perception couldn't quite process what it was seeing. Nothing. It said in a voice like equations solving themselves. I require nothing. I am here to observe. The three powers occupied different sections of the Roadhouse, forming a triangle with a bar at its center. Me at the center. I was suddenly, horribly aware that I was standing at the convergence point of forces I couldn't begin to understand. More customers arrived. Normal ones, or what passed for normal at the last stop. They gave the powers a wide berth, sitting in the spaces between them, careful not to draw attention. The beautiful woman in red entered, saw the assembled powers, and for the first time since I met her, looked afraid. She didn't sit at the bar but chose a booth far from the triangle, making herself small. At 1 a.m., a fourth figure entered, and the temperature in the Roadhouse dropped 20 degrees in an instant. This one didn't bother with a human shape. It was a void, an absence, a hole in reality shaped roughly like a person. Where it walked, things aged and decayed. The wood floor grayed and cracked. The air itself seemed to wither. Bourbon, it said, and hearing it speak was like hearing the heat death of the universe given voice. And information. This was it. The test the woman in red had warned me about. The power wanted more than a drink. It wanted me to engage, to provide something beyond basic service. I poured the bourbon and set it down without speaking, without making eye contact, following Rule 12. Maintain distance. Don't engage. The bartender is silent, the void thing said, addressing the room. How quaint. How traditional. It turned its non-face toward me, and I felt my skin crawl. I'm looking for something. Someone perhaps. A traveler who passed through here 3 days ago. Tall, dark hair, carried a silver case. Did you see such a person? I kept my expression neutral, continued wiping down the bar. Rule 1. Never answer questions about customers. What I'd seen, who'd come through, that wasn't information I was allowed to share. The boy keeps the old ways, the tall, shifting power said with something like approval. Good. This place works because of such discipline. Ask your questions elsewhere. Entropy. The bartender is not your source. The void thing turned its attention away from me. and I felt like I could breathe again. Then perhaps one of you knows. It said to the assembled powers. The traveler carries something that belongs to me. Something stolen during the last convergence. I want it back. Want or not claims, the darkness smoke said. You'll need proof of ownership, and even then, if the traveler reached sanctuary before you caught them, they're beyond your reach. You know the laws. The laws are old, Entropy said. Perhaps too old. Perhaps it's time for new arrangements. The temperature dropped further. The geometry creature's angle shifted, becoming sharper, more aggressive. The tall power grew taller, its head now touching the ceiling, which seemed to stretch upward to accommodate it. I realized I was witnessing the beginning of a confrontation, possibly a battle, between things that could probably level the entire state of Texas if they decided to fight seriously. And I was standing in the middle of it. The laws stand. Mr. Garrett's voice cut through the tension. He'd risen from his booth, and he looked different now. Taller, straighter, with an authority I hadn't seen before. This is neutral ground. Has been for 3,000 years. Will be for 3,000 more. You all accepted the terms when you entered. Disputes are discussed, not fought. That's the compact. That's why this place exists. The human speaks, Entropy said, and speaks truth, unfortunately. Very well. Discussion then. The traveler is here, in this room, and I know it. Show yourself, thief, and let's negotiate your surrender. Every customer in the Roadhouse suddenly looked suspicious. The elderly couple, the lone trucker, the teenagers still playing songs on the jukebox. Any of them could be the traveler in disguise, hiding among the lesser beings while powers hunted them. Then the storage room door rattled violently, the heavy padlock shaking. Everyone froze. The powers turned as one toward the sound. No, Mr. Garrett said quietly. Not that. Anything but that. The rattling increased, accompanied by that terrible screaming I'd heard before. But now there were words in it, barely comprehensible. The compact is broken. The cage is failing. 3,000 years, and it's finally failing. When I'm free, there will be no more neutral ground, no more sanctuary, no more rules. What is that? Entropy demanded. What have you been keeping locked away in there, Garrett? Mr. Garrett looked old again, desperately old. The reason the Roadhouse was built, he said, the reason any of us tolerate this arrangement. It was here first, before humans, before any of your kinds walked these dimensions. It's the first hunger, the thing that devoured until there was nothing left to devour except itself. We trapped it here, built the Roadhouse as a prison, made it the foundation of our compact. As long as the Roadhouse stands and the rules are followed, it stays contained. And if it escapes, the tall power asks quietly, then everything becomes food, Mr. Garrett said. Everything. All the dimensions, all realities, all of us. It won't stop until there's nothing left but itself, and then it'll starve in the emptiness it created, and maybe that's what it wants. Maybe extinction is its goal. The storage room door bulged outward, the wood creaking, the metal bands groaning. Whatever was in there was throwing itself against the barrier with increasing force. The rules are weakening, the geometry creature said, its mathematical precision somehow conveying alarm. Something has changed. Someone has broken the compact. Every eye in the room, human, inhuman, and other, turned to me. I felt the weight of their attention, like a physical pressure. The bartender, Entropy said slowly, "What have you done, boy? What rule have you broken?" I ran for the past 3 nights frantically. I'd followed every rule. I'd stayed behind the bar, served without questions, maintained the closing time, ignored the storage room, stayed awake during the dead hour. I'd done everything right, hadn't I? The beautiful woman in red spoke up. He's followed every written rule perfectly. I've watched him every night. She looked at Mr. Garrett. What are their unwritten rules? Things he wouldn't know. Mr. Garrett's face was grim. Show me what you've collected, he said to me. The things you found and kept. My stomach dropped. I pulled out the Ziploc bag I've been carrying with me. The one containing the tooth, the crystallized shard, the impossible feather, the gold coin. Mr. Garrett's expression confirmed my fear. You weren't supposed to take anything, he said quietly. Nothing leaves the Roadhouse. Everything that manifests here is part of the binding, part of the cage. By removing these items, even small ones, you've been weakening the barrier night after night. The first hunger has been using them as anchors, pulling itself toward freedom through the connections you created. That wasn't in the rules, I said desperately. There was nothing about not taking things, because it should be obvious. Entropy said with something like dark amusement, don't take what isn't yours from a magical prison. That's basic supernatural common sense. The storage room door splintered, a crack appearing down the middle. Something pushed through, something that looked like an arm, but wasn't, something that was trying to remember how to be flesh, but was really just organized hunger wearing a physical shape. Fix this, the tall power said, looking at me and Mr. Garrett. Fix this now, or we'll have to fight, and fighting here will only weaken the cage further. We'll destroy your Roadhouse and whatever town is nearest, and the first hunger will escape anyway. Put them back, Mr. Garrett said to me. Go into the storage room and put everything back exactly where you found it. Might not be enough, but it's the only chance. You want me to go in there? I looked at the cracking door, at the thing pushing through. That's suicide. Yes, Mr. Garrett said simply. It is, but it's also the only way to save everyone, including yourself. The rules protected you. You broke them, even unknowingly. Now you have to fix it. And that means facing what the rules were protecting you from. I looked at the bag in my hands, at the innocent-seeming artifacts I'd collected. Souvenirs from my brush with the impossible. And they were going to end the world if I didn't return them. The geometry creature spoke, its mathematical voice somehow gentle. If you do this, human, and you survive, you'll have saved countless realities. That is worth something, even if no one will ever know. Even if you died doing it. The storage room door cracked further. The arm thing withdrew, and I heard laughter from beyond the door. Deep, ancient, hungry laughter that promised terrible things. I took a deep breath, looked at Mr. Garrett, and said, Where's the key? Mr. Garrett pulled a key from around his neck, an old brass thing on a leather cord. It looked ordinary, the kind of key that might open a shed or a diary. Nothing that should secure an entity capable of devouring realities. He held it out to me, and his hand was shaking. Once you open the door, you'll have maybe 3 minutes before it fully manifests, he said. Find where these items originated. You'll know the spots, they'll call to you, and place them back exactly. Don't look directly at the first hunger. Don't listen if it speaks to you. Don't believe anything it shows you. It's older than truth, and it's had 3,000 years to learn how to lie. I took the key. It was warm, almost hot, as if it had been sitting in sunlight. The moment my fingers closed around it, I felt a pull toward the storage room door, a magnetic certainty about what I had to do. The collected artifacts in my bag seemed to pulse with their own awareness, eager to return home. The powers had moved, forming a circle around the storage room door with me at the center. They weren't here to help, I realized. They were here to contain. If I failed, if the first hunger broke free, they'd try to stop it. The Roadhouse would be the battleground, and I'd be collateral damage. Daniel, the beautiful woman in red, said softly. She'd moved closer, standing just outside the circle of powers. What you're about to face, it's going to offer you things. It's going to show you things. Remember that it's hunger first and foremost. It wants to consume, and it'll say anything to get you to set free. Promise me you'll remember what's real. I nodded, not trusting my voice. My legs felt weak as I walked toward the storage room. The other customers, the regulars, the travelers, all the strange beings who'd been waiting out their layover at the last stop, had pressed themselves against the far walls, as far from the storage room as possible. Some were praying in languages I'd never heard. Others were simply watching with the resignation of those who'd seen apocalypses before. The storage room door was barely holding together, cracks spiderwebbing across its surface. That not quite an arm had withdrawn, but I could see through the gaps in absolute darkness beyond. Not the darkness of an unlit room, but the darkness of nothing, of space between spaces, of the void before creation. I inserted the key with trembling hands. The lock clicked open with a sound like a bone breaking. The padlock fell away, hitting the floor and shattering into rust. The door swung inward on its own, and a wave of cold rolled out, so intense it burned. The storage room was larger than it should be. Much larger. From outside, it should have been maybe 10 by 10 feet. Inside, it stretched away into impossible distances, a warehouse-sized space that couldn't possibly fit within the Roadhouse's structure. The walls were lined with shelves, and every shelf held artifacts, thousands of them, millions perhaps, stretching away into the darkness. Each one was something that had manifested at the Roadhouse over the centuries, kept here to maintain the cage. And in the center of it all, suspended in chains made of something that glowed faintly blue, was the first hunger. It was trying very hard to be human-shaped, but the effort was clearly costing it. The form kept slipping, revealing things underneath. Mouths that weren't mouths, eyes that saw through dimensions, appendages that existed in more than 3 spatial dimensions, and hurt my brain to perceive. It was massive and small at the same time, both contained by the chains, and somehow extending far beyond them. When it noticed me, every single mouth smiled. "The bartender," it said, and its voice was my voice, my mother's voice, my father's voice, every voice I'd ever loved or trusted. "The little rule follower. Come to return what you stole? How responsible. How predictable. How deliciously doomed." I clutched the bag tighter and stepped further into the room. The door remained open behind me. I'd been smart enough not to let it close, and I could see Mr. Garrett and the powers watching from the main room. They couldn't help me in here. The storage room was outside their jurisdiction, a space unto itself. The artifacts in my bag were pulling now, tugging toward different parts of the vast room. The tooth wanted to go left, toward a shelf marked with symbols that hurt to read. The feather pulled upward, toward the ceiling where larger items hung on hooks. The crystallized shard dragged me forward, toward the first hunger itself. "That's right," the thing said encouragingly. "Bring them back. Restore them to their places. Strengthen my cage." Or, its form shifted, and suddenly it was wearing my face, my exact face, looking at me with my own eyes. "Or you could break the chains. Use the artifacts as keys. Free me, and I'll give you everything you've ever wanted. Knowledge, power, immortality. I'll teach you the true rules of reality, the ones that make your 12 little policies look like children's games." Not interested, I managed to say, though my voice came out as a croak. "No." Then perhaps understanding. "Don't anyone know what I am? Why I was in prison here? The power's out there. They've told you I'm some mindless hunger, a force of pure consumption. But that's their truth, not mine. I was the first consciousness, Daniel. Before the universe, before reality, there was me. And I was lonely. I was moving toward the shelves, trying to focus on returning the artifacts, but the thing's words burrowed into my brain like worms. "I created everything," it continued. "All the realities, all the dimensions, all the life. I created them because I was alone in the nothing, and I wanted companions. But creation requires substance, and substance requires energy, and energy requires fuel. So I consumed parts of myself to make everything else. I am the universe, Daniel. Every atom, every star, every living thing, all of it is me, just me rearranged into different configurations." I reached the shelf where the tooth belonged. There was a gap, a specific space where dust patterns showed something had been for a very long time. I placed the tooth back, and it clicked into place like a puzzle piece. The blue chains around the first hunger brightened slightly. And do you know what I learned? The thing asked, and now its voice was sad, almost human. I learned that everything I created fears me, fears their origin. They imprisoned me here, used parts of me to cage the rest of me, and called it salvation. They're keeping you from your own source, Daniel, from understanding what you really are. The crystallized shard was pulling me closer to the thing. I could see now that the chains holding it were embedded with thousands of similar shards, a lattice of crystallized something that formed the actual cage. The shard in my hand wanted to join its fellows, to become part of the prison again. But to place it back, I'd have to get within arm's reach of the first hunger. "You're afraid," it observed in my mother's voice, the voice from my childhood that had comforted me through nightmares. "Of course you are, but fear is just another name for respect. Come closer, my child. Return what's mine. Strengthen my cage like a good little bartender following good little rules." I stepped closer, and the cold intensified. Ice formed on my clothes, my skin. Each breath hurt, frost forming in my lungs. The shard in my hand was so bright now it was hard to look at, pulsing with eagerness to return to the lattice. "One question," the first hunger said, and now it was using Mr. Garrett's voice. "Did they tell you what happens to the artifacts when they're returned? Did they mention that every item that goes back into the cage feeds me? That you're not strengthening my prison, you're feeding the prisoner? That with each artifact returned, I grow stronger, closer to breaking free?" My hand froze inches from its chains. Was it telling the truth? Or was this the lie the woman in red had warned me about? "Look at the chains, Daniel. Really look. Do they seem weaker or stronger than when you entered?" I looked. The chains had been glowing faintly blue when I first saw them. After I'd returned the tooth, they'd brightened. But as I looked closer, I could see hairline fractures that hadn't been there before. The brightness wasn't strength. It was energy building up, pressure increasing, cracks forming in the containment. "You see it now," the thing said with satisfaction. "They didn't lie to you, exactly. They just didn't tell you the whole truth. Returning the artifacts will temporarily stabilize the cage. Yes. For maybe a day, maybe a week. But every time an artifact is returned, it creates a resonance, a feedback loop. The cage remembers what it was before, and remembering weakens it. You're not saving anyone, Daniel. You're just delaying the inevitable while making it easier for me when I finally break free." I stood there, frozen, the crystallized shard burning cold in my palm. Behind me, I could hear Mr. Garrett shouting something, but the words were muffled, distant. The storage room was its own reality, and in here, only the first hunger's voice seemed clear. "So here's your real choice," it continued, shifting through faces, people I knew, people I'd loved, people I'd lost. "You can return the artifacts and buy them a few more days before I escape anyway, weakened and angry and ready to consume everything out of spite. Or you can break the chains now, intentionally, and I'll be grateful. I'll spare you. I'll spare your world. I'll only consume the powers out there, the ones who imprison me, and then I'll return to the nothing I came from. Satisfied, complete." "You're lying," I said, but my voice shook with uncertainty. "Am I?" The thing's form solidified into something almost human, an old man with kind eyes. "Think, Daniel. Use that brain I gave you when I created humanity. If I wanted to consume everything, why would I have created anything in the first place? Why give life to beings that could trap me? Why make a universe at all if I just wanted to eat it?" It made a terrible kind of sense. The logic was seductive, reasonable. Maybe the powers were the real villains, keeping their creator locked away out of fear and prejudice. Maybe, Daniel. The woman in red's voice cut through my thoughts like a knife. She was at the storage room entrance, unable to enter but screaming to be heard. "It's showing you what you want to see. It's finding the story that makes you the hero. That's what it does. That's how it feeds, on doubt, on compassion, on the human need to believe we're doing the right thing. The first hunger's expression twisted with annoyance. She's afraid, it hissed. Afraid of what I represent. Afraid of change. Keep her voice out. Listen to me. I'm your only truth here. But the woman's words had broken the spell. I looked at the thing in chains again, really looked, and saw past the human face to what was underneath. It wasn't lonely. It wasn't sad. It wasn't even really conscious in a way I could understand. It was appetite given form, need made manifest. It would say anything, be anything, promise anything to get free. Because that's all it knew how to do. The powers had imprisoned it not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Because some things are too dangerous to exist. Some hungers can never be satisfied. I thrust the crystallized shard into the chain lattice, jamming it into its designated spot. The cage flared brilliant blue, and the first hunger screamed. Not in pain. I don't think it'd feel pain, but in frustration and rage. The kind face melted away, revealing something vast and terrible and absolutely inhuman. You'll regret this, it roared in a voice like reality tearing, when I break free. And I will break free. Maybe not today, maybe not for another 1,000 years, but eventually, I'll remember you. I'll remember this moment. And I'll make sure you're the last thing I consume. Daniel Morrison. I'll eat your past, your future, every moment you ever existed, and you'll feel every second of it. I ran for the feather, the last artifact. It was pulling toward the ceiling, toward hooks where massive items hung. What looked like pieces of architecture, fragments of buildings or monuments from places that probably didn't exist anymore. I saw a ladder against one wall and climbed frantically, the feather burning in my pocket. The first hunger was thrashing now, testing its chains, and the entire storage room shook. Artifacts fell from shelves, shattering on the floor. Each broken piece made the chains flicker and dim. I could hear the powers chanting something in the main room, a language that predated language, trying to reinforce the containment from outside. I reached the ceiling level and found the hook where the feather belonged. There was a collection of them, feathers from impossible birds, each one a key in the prison. Mine slid into place with a click that I felt in my bones. The chains blazed like the sun, so bright I had to shield my eyes. The first hunger's screaming reached a crescendo, and then cut off abruptly. When I could see again, the thing had collapsed in on itself, compressed back down to something small and contained, a dark sea to the center of the chains that barely looked like anything at all. Temporary, it whispered, its voice now barely audible. Just temporary. The bartenders always make mistakes, always take souvenirs. You'll be back, or your replacement will. They always come back. I climbed down the ladder on shaking legs. The storage room was already shrinking, collapsing back to its normal dimensions. Shelves folded in on themselves, artifacts compressing into impossibly small spaces. By the time I reached the door, it was just a regular storage room, maybe 10 by 10, with the first hunger's cage now small enough to fit in the palm of my hand, sitting on a central pedestal. I stumbled out into the main room, and the door slammed shut behind me. The padlock reassembled itself from rust, clicking back into place. Mr. Garrett was there immediately, steadying me. "You did it," he said, and I could hear genuine relief in his voice. "You actually did it. Most people would have listened to it, believed its lies. But you held on to what was real. The powers were dispersing, their triangle formation breaking. The tall shifting one paused near me. The human showed strength, it said. Noteworthy. The cage will hold for now. But it spoke truth about one thing. Eventually, another bartender will make a mistake. The first hunger is patient. It has time. Then we'll deal with it when that happens, Mr. Garrett said firmly. Like we always have. The powers left, one by one, disappearing through the door into whatever dimensions they called home. The other customers followed, the crisis averted, their layover at the last stop complete. Within 15 minutes, The Roadhouse was nearly empty. The beautiful woman in red was the last to leave. She approached me at the bar, where I'd collapsed onto a stool, exhausted beyond measure. "You were incredibly brave," she said softly, "or incredibly stupid. I haven't decided which. But you saved us all tonight, Daniel. That's worth something." She kissed my forehead, and her lips were cold as winter. "I hope you survive the rest of your employment. You've earned that much." She left, and then it was just me and Mr. Garrett in the empty Roadhouse. The clock on the wall showed 4:47 a.m. I'd been in the storage room for less than an hour, though it felt like days. "I can't do this anymore," I said. "I'm sorry, but I can't. This job, this place, it's too much. I'm not strong enough." Mr. Garrett nodded slowly. "I understand, but you got to finish the shift. Rules are rules. And you've got one more night on your work week. Can you make it one more night?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to walk out right then and never come back. But something in me, maybe pride, maybe stubbornness, maybe just the need to finish what I'd started, made me nod. "One more night. Then I'm done." "Fair enough," Mr. Garrett said. "One more night." The rest of the shift was quiet. A few stragglers came in, normal travelers who seemed actually human, ordering coffee and food without incident. At 5:55, I gave a closing warning. At 6 a.m., I locked up and walked to my car. The sun was rising over the desert, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. In the morning light, the last stop looked like what it was supposed to be, just an old roadhouse, weathered and worn, nothing special. But I knew the truth now. I knew what lived beneath it, what it contained, what it protected the world from. I drove home and slept for 14 hours straight, dreamless and deep. When I woke, it was evening, and I had to decide whether I was really going back for that final shift. The money would be good. One more night would complete my first week, and the paycheck Mr. Garrett had promised would solve a lot of my financial problems. But was any amount of money worth risking my life, my sanity, my soul? I thought about the first hunger's last words. That bartender's always made mistakes. That it was just a matter of time before someone weakened the cage enough for it to escape. If I quit, someone else would take the job. Someone who might not be as careful. Someone who might doom everyone. But that wasn't my responsibility, was it? I'd saved the world once. That was enough. Let someone else take the risk. Except I kept thinking about all those photographs on the wall, all those scratched out eyes, all those people who'd failed, who'd broken rules, who'd paid the price. How many of them had been like me, desperate for work, unaware of what they were signing up for? How many had died, or worse, because they hadn't been warned properly? At 10:30 p.m., I got in my car and started driving toward the last stop. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. One more night, one more shift. Then I'd quit with a clear conscience, knowing I'd finished what I'd started. The drive was familiar now, the landscape's strangeness no longer shocking. I was adapting to the impossible, learning to see the world's hidden layers. That should have frightened me more than it did. The fifth night was quiet, surprisingly, anticlimactically quiet. A few regulars came through. I recognized some faces from previous nights and ordered their usual drinks. The jukebox played softly. The dead hour came and went with only mild drowsiness. The storage room was silent, its doors solid and secure. It was almost disappointing, like the world was giving me an easy finale after the terror of the fourth night. But I didn't question it. I just served drinks, followed rules, and counted down the hours until dawn. At 3 a.m., the beautiful woman in red appeared. She sat at the bar and smiled at me. "Your last night," she said. "I can tell. You've made up your mind to leave. How did you know?" "Because you're relaxed. Every other night, you've been tense, alert, ready for disaster. Tonight, you're just going through the motions. You've already left mentally. The body's just finishing its obligations." She wasn't wrong. I poured her a martini without being asked. "What happens now? Does Mr. Garrett find another desperate fool to work here?" "He always does. This job posting has been running for centuries. under different guises. There's always someone who needs money badly enough to ignore red flags. Most don't last a week. Some last months. One or two have lasted years. But everyone leaves eventually, Daniel. The ones who survive anyway. What about you? I asked. Why do you keep coming back here? She swirled her drink thoughtfully. Because places like this are necessary. The last stop sits at a crossroads between realities, and someone needs to use it to keep it active, to maintain the cage. If we stop coming, if the Roadhouse closed, the first hunger would eventually gnaw through its prison. So we come, we drink, we follow the rules, and we keep the world safe without the world even knowing it needs saving. That seems like a lonely way to exist. It is, she agreed. But loneliness is better than extinction. You'll understand that more as you get older, as you rejoin the normal world and try to forget what you've seen here. You'll be lonely there too, Daniel. Lonely in a way normal people can't understand. Because you'll know the truth about how thin the walls of reality really are. At 5:55, I gave my final closing warning. At 6 a.m., dawn broke across the desert. Mr. Garrett emerged from the back room with an envelope. Your week's pay, he said, plus a bonus for handling the situation with the first hunger. You earned it. I took the envelope. It was thick with cash. More money than I'd made in 3 months at my previous job. Blood money, I thought. Payment for dancing with Apocalypse. I'm not coming back. I told him. I know, he said. It's always the smart ones who leave after they figure out what's really going on. The ones who stay, who work here for years, they're the ones who've got nowhere else to go. No other life they can return to. You're young, Daniel. You still got options. Use them. What about you? I asked. How long have you been doing this? He smiled, and for just a moment, I saw past his human appearance to something older, something that had been here long before the Roadhouse was built. Long enough to know the rules exist for a reason. Long enough to know they're worth following. Now go. Get out of here before you change your mind. The desert has a way of making people stay longer than they should. I walked to my car without looking back. As I drove away, I watched the last stop shrink in my rearview mirror until it disappeared behind a curve in the road. I half expected to be unable to find my way back to the highway, to be trapped in some supernatural maze. But the drive was straightforward, and within an hour, I was back in Terlingua, back in a normal world. I tried to readjust to regular life. I used the money to pay off debts, to buy time to find a normal job with normal hours serving normal people. But the woman in red had been right. I was lonely in a way I couldn't explain to anyone. I'd seen behind the curtain of reality, and I couldn't unsee it. At night, I dreamed of the Roadhouse, of the rules, of the first hunger whispering promises in the darkness. Sometimes I woke up with sand in my bed, though I was hundreds of miles from the desert. Sometimes I heard the jukebox playing songs that shouldn't exist. 3 months after I quit, I saw a news article about a truck stop that had burned down in Arizona, not far from the border. No explanation for the fire. No survivors. The article mentioned strange reports for people in the area. Lights in the sky. Sound like screaming. The smell of something sweet and rotten. The article included a photo of the ruins. I recognized the layout. It was a roadhouse, just like the last stop. Another one of Mr. Garrett's establishments, probably. Another cage. And if it had burned, I try not to think about what that meant. Try not to imagine the first hunger, or something like it. Loose in the world. Try not to feel responsible for not being there, for not following the rules, for not keeping the cage secure. But late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, I'd open my laptop and search for job postings. Remote locations. Night shifts. Discretion required. Competitive pay. They were out there if you knew how to look. Roadhouses and diners and gas stations and places that shouldn't exist, run by people who weren't entirely people, serving customers who were passing through from somewhere to somewhere else. The world had more crossroads than I'd ever imagined. More thin places where reality wore away and other things could slip through. More cages that needed tending. more rules that needed following. I haven't applied to any of them. Not yet. But I keep the envelopes with cash under my mattress untouched. I keep the impossible artifacts I collected, the ones that weren't part of the cage, the ones I found after that fourth night, in a locked box. Evidence that what I experienced was real. Proof that the world is stranger than anyone wants to believe. And sometimes, on particularly lonely nights, I get in my car and drive west. Not to the last stop specifically, but toward it. Toward that part of Texas where the desert stretches forever and the rules of reality grow flexible. I never make it all the way there. I always turn back before crossing the threshold. But the urge is there, growing stronger each time. Because here's what I learned during my week of the last stop. Some people are meant for the normal world, and some people are meant for the spaces in between. Some of us are born to follow rules that keep impossible things contained. And once you've seen the cages, once you've understood what they protect us from, it's hard to walk away completely. The woman in red told me everyone leaves eventually, but she also said some come back. Some can't help but return to the crossroads, to the way station, to the neutral ground where powers negotiate and the first hunger waits in its chains. I haven't gone back yet, but I think about it. Every day, I think about it a little more. If you're reading this, if you've somehow stumbled across my story, learn from my mistake. If you see a job posting for a night shift at a remote roadhouse, if the pay seems too good to be true, if there are rules that seem overly specific and strangely ominous, walk away. Find another job. The money isn't worth what you'll see, what you'll know, what you'll become. But if you can't walk away, if desperation or curiosity or fate drives you to accept the position, then follow the rules. All of them. Exactly. Without exception. The rules exist for a reason. They're not suggestions or guidelines or paranoid precautions. They're the thin line between survival and becoming another photograph on the wall with scratched out eyes. They're the difference between serving the darkness and being consumed by it. They're the only thing keeping the first hunger and things like it from devouring everything we know. Follow the rules. Always follow the rules. And if you can't, well, at least you'll have company in whatever comes next. Because the desert is full of people who thought they knew better, who thought the rules didn't apply to them, who thought they could negotiate with hunger itself. The last stop is still there, still operating, still serving customers who travel roads that don't appear on maps. Mr. Garrett is still hiring, still posting those ads that desperate people find it to in the morning. The Roadhouse stands, the cage holds, and the world continues on, blissfully unaware of what exists in the spaces between. For now. But the first hunger was right about one thing. Eventually, someone will make a mistake big enough to break the cage. Maybe in a year, maybe in a century, maybe in a millennium. But it will happen because humans are imperfect and curiosity is our nature and rules are made to be broken. When that day comes, when the first hunger finally breaks free, I hope I'm far away. I hope I've managed to forget, to move on, to convince myself it was all just a fever dream brought on by isolation and desperation. But I don't think I will be. I don't think I can be. Because once you've worked the night shift at a desert roadhouse where the rules are terrifying, once you've served drinks to powers and stared into the eyes of entropy itself, once you've stood at the crossroads between realities and chosen to protect rather than profit, you're changed, marked, part of something larger than yourself, whether you want to be or not. The last stop sits in the deep desert, waiting. The rules are posted behind the bar. The storage room door is locked tight. And somewhere in the darkness, the first hunger waits too, patient and eternal, knowing that eventually, inevitably, someone will open the door again. I just hope it's not me. But I'm not sure anymore. I'm really not sure. The end.